My name's Elspeth Farrar, Director of the Career Service at Imperial. And what we're going to do in this session is talk a little bit about PhD careers, academic careers versus non-academic careers, thinking about how you make that kind of career choice, what skills you should be considering developing while you're doing your PhD, and what help we can offer you at Imperial to help you with your career planning. And then hopefully, as I say, we'll have time for questions afterwards. I think one of the first things to consider if you're planning on coming into a PhD is obviously you should be thinking about what's your motivation for that, what do you want to be aiming for. And it's common for most people coming into PhDs to be thinking that they want to be aiming for an academic career of some kind. Some students will achieve that, not all of them will follow an academic career, and I think it's important when you come into a PhD to come in with your eyes open as far as that's concerned. There was some research carried out a couple of years ago by the Royal Society looking at what happens to PhD students, what happens to early researchers in academic environments. And they came up with this rather sort of complicated looking chart, having tracked a cohort of PhD students over the period of their careers. And what they found that, if you imagine at this end here is having completed their PhD, and at that stage, slightly more than half of PhD students will go off and find a career outside academia, possibly outside science and research, and move into a different area completely. And at that time, about 47% stayed on within academia into a postdoc contract and followed a postdoc contract. But then after, say, and this is probably the end of a first postdoc contract, so round about a year into a postdoc, then another kind of tranche went off and into research, but not necessarily in academia. So research in industry, research in government and public sector research organisations, but outside of the university sector. And then this sort of what was left, this 30%, carried on, maybe did another postdoc contract, possibly a third postdoc contract. And then there gets to be a sort of crunch point where people begin to think, okay, well, I need to be getting a more permanent job at this stage, rather than continually going from postdoc contract to postdoc contract. And at that point, another enormous tranche moved off outside of academia. The majority of them going into other careers outside of research, but some going into industry and research into industry, which left a very small 3.5% staying on to more permanent academic jobs within universities. So these would be people who would get lectureships and stay on in a permanent role within a university. And then from those people who get lectureships, from this kind of tracking, a very small proportion actually reach a professorial level. So it's important when you're thinking about a PhD that you go into it fully aware that this huge tranche of people here are going to end up with a very small proportion that actually see it right through to a more senior level in an academic career. That's not to say that you're not going to gain all sorts of fantastic advantages and skills by staying on and doing postdocs, but you have to be aware that there is an enormous cut-off point now, an enormous move out of academia, having done some postdoc contracts, and that only a smallish proportion carry on within universities. And that's partly because far more people than ever before are actually doing PhDs. So there just isn't the capacity to actually track everybody through into an academic career. So bear this in mind, and when you're thinking about what do you want a PhD to do for you, how does it fit with your long-term plan and your long-term career plan, and go into it with your eyes open. You may end up being this small percentage up here, but you may not. You may end up going into this route up here instead. So being aware of this is important. Just to put some stats on that, and this is slightly more recent data. So the average, the sort of total average of all PhDs or postdocs continuing on to postdoc research positions is about 22% across the whole of the UK. However, the STEM subjects do a lot better than that. So biological science is about 66%, physical science and engineering 42%, medical sciences 32%. This is the national figures for carrying on from PhD into postdocs and early research contracts. At Imperial, our average staying on to do postdocs is about 50%, so we're slightly above the national average for our PhD students staying on into a postdoc contract. If you are thinking that you want to be aiming for that research career in universities, then there are certain things that you need to consider as a PhD student and also as a postdoc after you've got your PhD. And it isn't all about just doing your research. There's a lot more that goes into making a successful research career. And these are just some of the things that you need to be thinking about. So, obviously, it goes without saying that you've got to be undertaking innovative research. But you also need to be publishing. And you also need to be getting in funding. And that's critical now to a career in academia. You have to be able to think about how you attract research funding, projects that are going to be fundable, projects that people are going to invest in, understanding how to write research proposals and funding bids is fairly critical. So when you're a PhD student, if you get the opportunity to be involved in bids for research funding and working with a team that is involved in that, then take every opportunity you can get. Take every opportunity you can get to be involved in teaching and lecturing and supervising. Project management skills are fairly critical as well. Supervision of research projects, once you're a postdoc, absolutely critical that you get that experience of supervising other PhD students. But as a PhD student, fairly important that you get some opportunity to supervise, say, master's students or undergraduates in their final year as well. Taking an active interest in the administration of the department, being involved and active, mentoring other people in the department and more junior staff in the department, and participation in knowledge transfer. Today, one of the most important things is how is your research going to be translatable? So having an understanding about what you're doing and how it can be translated is critical, and that's really critical in terms of attracting funding as well for research. So obviously, as a PhD student, you won't get involved in all of this, but it's having an awareness that all of these aspects are going to be important if you're going to progress a research career in a university. So generally, a career planning process comes in a sort of cycle, if you like. You need, first of all, to understand yourself and what you're good at, what your skills are, what your abilities are. You then need to research your opportunities. Once you've made that, done that and come to your decisions, you need to then think about how you actually apply for things and sourcing your opportunities and applying. And it's a cycle. It doesn't happen once in your life. This is a cycle that should be going on constantly and at various periods throughout your life, reassessing where you are, thinking about where you want to get to, and going through this process at a regular stage. So when you are thinking about career planning as a PhD student, you need to be thinking about yourself. How much is your discipline area going to be important to you? Obviously, if you're going to go into directly into research, then you are likely to be using your discipline area. But remember, when you're a PhD student, you become very, very specialised in a very small part of your discipline. You may never again use that exact piece of research and that exact topic area. if you go into an academic career, you may end up researching all sorts of different things. If you go into industry and research, you may never research or work again on the specific topic that you've done your PhD in. So it's having an understanding of how you can move your research skills from topic to topic, obviously within your discipline if you're doing research, but from, you know, what are the kind of connecting areas, what are the connecting topics that you could be looking at. There are also jobs that are aligned to your discipline, but you're not necessarily going to be using it directly, and especially if you move out of research, that might be more the case. And then there are a huge tranche of jobs for graduates and PhD students where they will take people from almost any discipline, but what they want are those kind of good transferable skills that you'll have developed as a PhD student. So one of the things you should be thinking about, what is it that you've actually enjoyed as a student? What have you enjoyed as in your undergraduate degree? What have you enjoyed in your master's degree that you actually want to take with you into your career? And what other things have you been doing that are going to influence your career choice as well? So it could be things that you do in your outside of your academic studies. It could be other interests that you've got, which might influence how you actually progress your career. If you are thinking about research, remember that universities aren't the only place that you can do research. And at Imperial we run special sessions for PhD students specifically to encourage people to think about the different environments that you could actually be doing research. So that could be industry, it could be publicly funded research institutes, it could be charities, government-funded organisations. There are lots of different environments where you can still actually pursue a research career. It doesn't have to be in a university. So as a PhD student, if you're interested in research, do keep an open mind about what the environment is that you could be working in, where you could actually be working. When you're thinking about your decisions, you need to be basing it on what kind of skills you've got, what skills you've got that are going to be relevant to whoever is going to employ you, whether that's a university or in industry or elsewhere. But you also need to be thinking about what do you actually enjoy doing and what do you excel at. And while you're a PhD student, it's a good idea to also be thinking, well, what are the areas that you actually need to develop? So that might be around your discipline area, but it could be other skills like communicating, project management, all sorts of different skills that you could be developing, problem solving, commercial awareness. You need to think about the kind of career options that are available to you and how do your skills fit into those different career options. And it's also important that you think about your own values and what motivates you, because that's what is going to give you job satisfaction. You've got to think about, you know, your values and how they might fit with a different industry sector or the values of a different organisation. And it's important that you bear those in mind as well when you're making career choices, because if you find yourself working in a situation that doesn't match your value set, then it can be a very uncomfortable experience. Once you've started at Imperial, we really encourage you to use the Careers Service to begin to think through these processes. And we encourage PhD students right from first year to make use of us, to come and talk to the careers consultants, to come to our events, so that you can begin to work through these considerations and these choices. So we'll get some tips from some people, both employers and alumni, talking about their research of industry and also their career choice.
In your career, you know, is it salary? Is it responsibility? Is it working on something that matters to you? When you sit down and identify those values, that's when you should go to the different careers engagement activities and begin to meet employers. Listen to what they've got to say. Once you hear an employer who shares the values that you've identified, that'll give you a much clearer idea whether you think that company might be the right one for you. At that point, you can then look at the company in a bit more detail, do some research, and really see if it's somewhere you'd like to apply for in the future.
I think my advice to somebody starting career planning is start as early as possible. In your final year at university, you will have very intense academic commitments and also be looking for your job for the following year. So the more time that you put into it, the easier it will be for you in the end.
Whilst at Imperial, what I found helpful was talking to my personal tutors and lecturers in the sectors specifically that I was interested in. So not just my degree in general, but the units within there that I found interesting. I found talking to the careers service useful because it helped me see what the professional jargon was for different areas and different sign-up application processes, also various websites for applications. I'd say ultimately becoming confident enough to talk to professionals, whether in Imperial or externally, and that was helped by events where external professors may have been, or external people employed within the sector.
I made myself aware of possible career options quite early on in the course. I became a member of some institutes, so the Institute of Civil Engineers and the Institute of Structural Engineers, which offered free membership for students. And that's really good because you get a lot of emails and newsletters every couple of weeks, which give you some information about the industry and what's happening.
Then when I came to Imperial, it was like, this is the time to choose what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So it was kind of, the career service was quite useful then to narrow it down into a specific type of engineering. I went to fairs and came and had some appointments and one-on-one sessions. And then I just had to narrow it down. I worked with the careers service to look at my skills and look at what I enjoyed and narrow it down into types of engineering.
If I was starting out again now, I'd get more volunteer experience. I'd stay in those volunteer places slightly longer, so instead of maybe a week, perhaps 3 weeks would be better, because longer durations just appear that much more professional. And I'd make more clear lists of where jobs are advertised, and if I then follow them up, who am I contacting, what's their contact details, and why did I do it in the first place?
The advice I would give any future students is that they really find out as much as possible about the projects and the supervisors and the research environment. So actively seeking out conversations with like senior staff that are kind of group leaders. And yeah, also finding a project that you really love, because you're going to spend 3 years or more researching this one topic. So I think you have to have a real passion for the subject.
Okay, so I think the theme there was really spending time researching is important, and certainly beginning to think through what options are available to you. This is important before you've actually decided which PhD to do as well, and while you're kind of deciding which institution to go to, but particularly important when you're beginning to think about what career options to take afterwards. So at Imperial we've got lots of help available to our students in terms of helping them with their career planning. We've got a very extensive website with information. We also have lots of company information, and there is also data on our website about what previous graduates have done, both at undergraduate and master's and PhD. So it's worth having a look at that, and that's accessible to everybody from our website. So it's worth having a look to see what previous people have done from the discipline area that you're interested in. There's also two sort of useful resources that you can be looking at on the Prospects website, which is prospects.ac.uk. One there is about options after your subject and the specific information there for PhD students. And then they also have a series called Your Degree, What Next? And again, there's one of those publications. This is about careers post-PhD, and it talks a lot about how you make a decision what to sort of channel your energies into, whether it's staying with research, whether it's going into industry, other sectors that might be particularly interested in PhD students. So worth looking at those resources as well. And then once you're at Imperial, and this probably goes the same for any institution, so whether you come to Imperial to do your PhD or not, it's really important that you begin to research what opportunities are out there. So I've already mentioned the occupational information, but we have lots of events that are specifically aimed at helping students raise their awareness. So we have a whole series of opportunities for you to find out about different job areas. We have forums, we have career talks, where people from different sectors come and talk about what it's like to work in the energy sector or in manufacturing or in the not-for-profit sector, public sector. We have one specifically for different roles for PhD students outside of research, but where particular jobs where employers are trying to recruit PhD students. We have a whole series of careers fairs, including one specifically for PhDs. And again, that's an opportunity to talk to companies who recruit PhD students. We have things like Recruiter in Residence Days, and we also run a whole series of skills workshops for PhD students. So these are aiming to improve some of your kind of transferable skills, like problem solving, like commercial awareness. Lots of jobs require you to do things like case study interviews, so we run a series of sessions for students to practice those sorts of interviews, mock interview sessions, etc. So there's lots of support there for PhD students to develop your skills while you're at Imperial, both through the Careers Service but also through the Graduate School, who run a series of skills workshops as well. And then we encourage you to take every opportunity to meet up with alumni from the college. So we have and organise alumni networking sessions. We have sessions called Meet the Professional, where we'll get an alumni in who's doing an interesting job in a particular sector, and you can come and spend 10 minutes talking to that person, finding out more about what they're doing. Alumni speed dating sessions, where you can go around a room and talk to all sorts of different people who are doing different kind of areas. So there's lots of opportunity to meet with companies, with alumni. We're very lucky at Imperial in that we're a very targeted institution, so we can make use of those employers that want to recruit our students and make sure that you get lots of opportunity to talk to them, to find out about what's on offer. And we use them as a resource as well, sort of asking employers to come and run things like mock interview days and assessment centre days, case study sessions. And if you're really not sure where you want to be aiming after you've done your PhD, there are a couple of things that we can suggest that you might want to look at now. One is called Career Planner and the other is called Career Report. And these are online planning tools, which will, I mean, they are only tools. They're not going to come up with the perfect answer for you in terms of a career. But what they will do is help you go through that process of thinking about your own skills and abilities, your own motivations, your own interests, your own values. And it will help you kind of go through that process in a fairly structured way. So if you're very unsure about what you want to be aiming for, doing one of these or both of these can help. But they are only tools. They're not going to come up with the right answer for you. But once you've started at Imperial, we really encourage all of our students to come and meet with a careers consultant as early on in your career as possible. What we don't want are PhD students who wait until they've submitted and are just about to leave us before they suddenly wake up and think, oh, I need to think about what I'm going to do next. So we like to work with PhD students early on in your first year or your beginning of your second year to start you thinking. And also it may be that depending on what you want to do, it would be worthwhile considering doing a bit of work experience or a bit of volunteering to actually help you develop some of the experience and skills. And that's the kind of thing that you need to be kind of planning in over your 3 years, 3.5 years that you're doing your PhD with us. So again, just a bit of advice here.
Think ahead around what motivates you as well, and what type of career do you want? Not, what are your motivators? What are your values? And what type of organisations also offer that?
I filtered out my options by, I suppose, looking at what I'd enjoy, looking at the specific components of what was involved, and often ringing up the people involved or emailing to get a bit more insight into what was proposed, because often you can glean a lot more information from someone's attitude towards a role and things like that.
I also wrote a list of the things I wanted, and those for me were location and pay and certain working hours and a work-life balance, and then things that I enjoyed as well, and being realistic about those. I just knew that I wouldn't want to leave London. It just narrowed down the search so much more that it makes it more bite-sized chunks, rather than having this ocean of things to look into and not knowing where to start.
I've got some friends who are engineers working in the construction industry, and I spoke to them from different companies, and I got an alumni from my course from a few years ahead of me, and I spoke to them about what their experience was. And that's incredibly enlightening, because they were still on that learning curve. They've only been working for a year or two, and so they could really remember what they thought it was going to be like, and then the reality, and they could give me that information.
So once you've kind of thought through who you are, how you want to fit into the world of work, what kind of thing you want to be aiming for, you need to kind of plan for that. You need to be thinking about your skill set, understanding what your strengths are and what your development needs are as well, and how you're going to address that while you're doing your PhD. You need to think about how your skills match with what companies or organisations are going to be looking for, and check to make sure you've got no shortfall there. And you need to be exploring and researching opportunities that match with your skills and interests and motivation. Next steps would be to start attending events where you can actually talk to people, seek advice from your careers service wherever you are, whichever university you end up going to. Make sure you make contact with your careers service early on, find out what help they provide specifically for PhD students, what events do they run specifically for PhD students, and make use of that early on in your PhD rather than leaving it until the last minute. Consider how you can get a bit of experience. So can you negotiate to do an internship? Can you get some exposure to industry or as part of your PhD program? If you're doing science and engineering, many PhDs are part funded by industry, have collaborative links with industry. Many of the departments, particularly at Imperial, will have links with specific companies. So see how you can capitalise on that while you're a PhD student by actually spending some time looking at how research is done with that company in that industry sector, going and getting some work experience, doing some exchange, whether it's with industry research exchange or with other universities and collaborative research partners, getting as much exposure as possible and as much experience as possible. What you don't want to do is come here as a PhD student, get into a lab and not get out again for another 3.5 years. You've got to look up, you've got to look around you, and you've got to take advantage of all sorts of opportunities that come your way and really capitalise on those. And then finally, make sure you've thought through this, and make sure that you've thought through the career area, because that's going to help you with your planning. The more experience you gain, the better. You might change your mind, but that's fine, because things do change, and it's not uncommon for graduates, whether it's from undergraduates or from PhDs, to have a variety of different careers in their lives. Whatever you kind of sign up to is not necessarily going to be something that you have to stay with, until you drop. People move around in their careers these days. They experiment, they try things out, and then they develop those skills and then move on and use those skills in different ways. So don't feel that you're kind of giving yourself a life sentence whenever you're thinking about your career choice. As I said at the start, it is a process, and most people will go through a kind of re-evaluation process at various stages throughout their careers. Whichever university you go to, go and get some help from your career service, go and speak to them early on and make sure that you're finding out what resources are available to you. And just finally, good luck.